With all the media attention on the social media influencer Andrew Tate, this week we're talking about misogyny, how it manifests itself in the classroom, and what steps could be taken to counteract it. We've had loads of feedback in the
So
inbox
much.
about this. Would you like to read our first comment, Jodie?
I would, yeah. This one is just sums everything up. I've had the whole walking past hands-on waste thing happen to me in the past year. I politely said something about it, but then somehow the situation flipped and I was made to feel like I was some kind of princess who had the audacity to mention it. I don't think I can change it much for myself, but when I see my 5-year-old taking the hands of women and girls and kissing the back of it, like some hybrid of Gomez Adams and Pepe Le Pew, I address it. Then I feel good that I've addressed it, but wonder where he ever saw it. I read about it, and hand kissing is seen some chivalrous way to greet a woman, but that in itself is a bit icky. I don't know what's right anymore. And that is from a mum to a 5-year-old boy.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodie.
So, this week our guest is Neil Morland, who isn't a misogynist, but is male. He's a geography learning engineer, AST lead practitioner who is in his 27th year of teaching. He's passionate about teaching and learning and inclusivity in the classroom. Hi, Neil. Can you just answer a question for me?
Yeah, hi, good evening.
Hi, what is a learning engineer?
Well, a learning engineer is a posher version of saying a teacher. When you go to, you go out for a meal and somebody says, what do you do? And you say, I'm a teacher. You get the immediate,
They roll their eyes.
You get the 30 weeks here, blah, blah, blah. So if you say I'm a learning engineer, they go, oh, that sounds interesting. You say, yeah, well, I spend my days engineering learning opportunities for young people.
Oh, good tip there for all those teachers out there.
And that engages a whole new audience and it opens up a whole new avenue of conversation. So I'm a teacher, but learning engineer I think sounds better than a teacher somehow.
Yeah.
Actually, it might help the relationship in the classroom if the pupils thought of you as a learning engineer. So you're facilitating.
I've heard that a facilitator, not a teacher, is important
rather than
difference.
pouring knowledge into an empty vessel.
So you've been teaching for quite a long time, and obviously 27 years ago was pre-social media.
Yep.
How do you think it's changed in that 27 years?
I think the classroom. I think the classroom itself is, in my opinion, has largely stayed the same. The dynamics of teaching young people. I know everyone brings books and things like that. And it's a very simple procedure, and I think that the dynamics for me, and I appreciate I'm a male and I'm 52 and I've got experience, but for me the dynamics of the classroom hasn't changed in that respect. What has changed, and what I've noticed is that. You know things are changing when students come in and say, "Sir, is it true that?" And you know instantly that it's something they've read off the internet. And today's one was, "Sir, is it true that the Americans are shooting down UFOs over their country?" I said, "Of course not. That's nonsense."
Yeah.
And so, it goes to the point you were saying before that what social media has done in the classroom has massively diminished students' ability to inquire and to find out what's what. They take things as being gospel. You know, I could talk for nonsense for half an hour in the classroom, and they'd still probably write it down and not say, "Hold on a minute." And I think that for me has been one of the bigger impacts of social media, and it's just the inability to find the truth in something. If somebody on the internet says, put your fingers in the air and hop on one foot, you'll become a unicorn, they would probably believe it. If it was somebody of, Love Island or whatever, and it sort of diminished the experts in many ways, in that anybody who has an opinion now is free to share it, whether the opinion is patently wrong or not. They're allowed to do so, and people believe it, and they take it as gospel. And as you know, young people are massively influenced by by celebrity and so on. And but I think a bigger impact for me has been COVID. I think COVID has, as we remove children from the classroom for those sort of periods of lockdown, I think the views that they've been getting, they've been more influenced by the
Yeah.
internet in that period, and views from home have become more entrenched. And what we've picked up afterwards is a deluge of students who, obviously, mental health is a big issue, but arrive with these quite deeply entrenched views that they perhaps didn't have before, or were there, and it's very, very difficult to unpick those, even more so when they're being sort of constantly, emblazoned on social media and what have you. So I don't think the dynamics of the classroom in terms of delivering a lesson has changed, but I'm having to change my way of doing things because students don't inquire. They don't.
Yeah.
They take things as being as gospel, and almost to the point where if you say that's wrong, they will say, "Well, no, it's not, because so and so said it."
Yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to just pick up, like you said, about COVID, and because obviously during COVID, we were all spending so much time around our family, and it became this kind of echo chamber of people who sort of agreed with you generally and had the same life experience as you. And just kind of, if you're in that background where it's not a positive home environment, and you perhaps have parents and a family that have got views that are outdated, that's then going to extenuate the problem as much as social media.
And also, what else did they have to do but go on the internet in that time? Because you couldn't go anywhere, you couldn't do anything, you couldn't meet your friends. So the use of social media perhaps went up during the pandemic. I don't know. But...
I think it certainly did. I think obviously the way students communicate these days is that that is the way they communicate, and
yes, it is.
Everything is done via whatever, and their window into their world is their phone. And when I was younger, it was BBC 1, 2, and 3, and that was it, and that's the information that you got, and now information is just bombarded, and I think, in the defence of the youngsters, and I know we're going to be talking about boys in a moment, I think it's very, very difficult for them to filter out what is and what isn't fact or fiction. And that's what I think our students are finding particularly difficult, because they don't know who to believe. And I think that's a very difficult problem to unpick and sort of unravel.
What's on your mind? Let us know your thoughts, ideas, and anecdotes. Drop us a line at beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk.
So when I first came into training, it was all about the prevent strategy. That was like the new thing in teaching, and we had so much training about it and so much talking about it, and kind of this comes sort of under that, because you're still preventing them from being radicalised. It's not what that was meant for.
But that's not what they focused on with the prevent strategy, is it?
But it is still radicalising our young people.
Yeah.
And that's so important. Not to do that is so important.
I agree, and I think the word influence. I mean, the internet is the Wild West, isn't it? There is almost no, whatever Google or anything says about it, it is the Wild West. It's largely unpoliced, and I think the word influencer, I think, is a very, very dangerous phrase, in that you're influencing young people to believe a certain thing, which by definition is radicalization. And I'm not certain how they get away with it. And the kind of a catch-all is, we live in a country with free speech, but free speech comes with a great cost attached to it. And the reason we've got free speech and able to have differing opinions is because we're in a country where it's been fought for. And with freedom of speech comes a huge responsibility to A, not say things that are patently wrong, and B, not say things that are divisive or hurtful. And those lines have become blurred. And whilst you can't go online and talk about terrorism, you can go online and talk about vile things against women or anything else. And it's my opinion, so it's my opinion. But it's the same difference. And I think there needs to be some conversation much, much higher than me that talks about this as being a form of radicalization. And
absolutely,
having me teaching as long as I have, you can see the way, particularly with boys, that we'll talk about later, that how boys are becoming hugely influenced by certain voices in certain platforms, and that is changing their behavior. And if you're changing their behavior by for the wrong reasons,
Yeah.
by definition, that is radicalization. And I think that's a very sinister thing that is cropping up. I think it's incredibly dangerous.
So, what would you do to support? We're talking about young men in particular in this episode. So, what would you do to support young men to see past the negative viewpoints?
I think one of the issues is that certainly in our school, and I'm sure it's not. I'm sure it's the same. If somebody says something, within earshot, the first thing is don't say that, and it invariably ends in a consequence, which doesn't really solve the problem. You're just telling a boy off for saying something, and the boy doesn't necessarily know, and I'm sure some do, but doesn't necessarily know that why they have said something, and why that is so wrong and hurtful. So
Yes.
I think there's a lot of work to be done. I know education is a thing, but we've got to have conversations with boys in a forum where we can discuss these things and they can say these things openly without the consequence of you're going to get punished, and be able to explain to them, why is it so hurtful that you've said this, and why is that so wrong? Because at the moment the tendency is to create a climate where you shut the conversation down. We don't have that conversation here, but we do. Boys are having it, whether it's in the classroom. Boys are having that conversation, and if you shut down the conversation, you're sort of telling the boys that it reinforces our idea that the likes of Andrew Tate are being silenced and they can't say.
Yeah.
Right.
I think it's the worst thing you can do, really.
And you empower them then to,
Yeah.
Andrew Tate's being silenced. Well, he's being silenced because of what he's actually saying.
Yes.
And there are two sides to Andrew Tate, which I think is quite sinister. The first one is that the boys initially, I think, bought into the fact that he's wealthy, he's fit, he's muscular, he drives fast cars, and it's kind of, it's a boyish ideal to have fast cars. But then what he's very cleverly done, and make no kind of mistake, Andrew Tate is a very clever, devious man. What he's managed to weave into the fabric of being a cigar smoking man with fast cars and a fast lifestyle, he's managed to very successfully weave into that part of that lifestyle involves being misogynistic and violent, and that's almost been a creeping sort of thing. And I think one of the issues that we're facing in school is that I don't think enough people are comfortable having the conversations and comfortable challenging that, particularly maybe teachers that are new into the profession.
Yeah.
I think particularly female staff that perhaps have been victim of misogyny. I think it's very difficult to have that conversation, within the classroom. So I think what needs to happen, rather than calling them out for what they're doing, we need to call them in. We need to call them into a conversation.
Yeah, totally
and
agree.
we need to listen to what they've got to say, and then explain to them, in a calm, open forum, that
Absolutely.
what you've just said is incredibly damaging and incredibly hurtful. And I think once you open that dialogue with them, giving the boys time to express the views and what they actually mean. So, for example, one of the current comments, which is quite upsetting, is that when boys are talking about playing FIFA soccer, if they've been beaten 5-0 by a friend, in their language, they say, I was raped last night by such and such on FIFA. Now, they don't mean it in the sense that, but the word raped to them has become to be, to be beaten and whatever. So that there is rather
horrible.
It is horrible. It's absolutely vile. But the conversation that needs to be had is to, why is that bad, sir? Well, it's bad because this, and rather than castigate them and call them out on it,
absolutely,
we need to call them into a conversation and say to the boys, look, saying that you were raped last night is incredibly hurtful and incredibly damaging in the context of what rape actually means, which is sexual violence. And when you explain to them about the connotation and the language used, I think that's when you start to chip away at the misogyny and the Andrew Tate and the sort of the almost casual, well, it was only a joke, sir. Well, no, it wasn't.
But it's not, is it?
No, it isn't only a joke.
We've got a couple of excellent comments to add in here. So this one is from a recent graduate. I've often found when talking to boys about feminism, some boys shut off and put up a defence, thinking I'm suggesting men are the root of all evil and having a go at them. When I'm actually trying to explain that toxic masculinity and the gender roles and stereotypes it enforces are harmful to men and boys too. I think you've got one as well, Marie, don't you?
I do. I think that addressing misogyny with young men in a way that tries to avoid making them feel like they're being attacked is important. Just speaking from experience, I've seen plenty of young men retreat into the depths of the internet and start following and preaching the gospel of misogynistic influencers because they feel like they're not being listened to. I think we need to involve them in the conversation so they don't feel like they're being blamed for everything, and emphasise why and how gender equality actually benefits everyone. Men's mental health is just one example I can think of here. I also think it's vital for male teachers to step up and deliver key messages around this too. And that's from someone that teaches RSE, relationships and sex education.
I think just picking up on one of the things you said before, I think the language of toxic masculinity, I think that's quite a counterproductive phrase. I think it's quite highly charged because I think a lot of boys' behaviours are referred to as, well, it's just toxic masculinity, and where it
Yeah.
is in fact just antisocial behaviour is what it is. I think having spent part of my role at school is I'm part of the inclusion and diversity and equity working party, and we're looking at ways of reframing toxic masculinity. And I think one of the problems that boys are facing is there's quite a broad spectrum of being a boy, and on the one
Yes.
end of the spectrum is the Andrew Tate, muscly, macho, I'm a real man. But the other end of the spectrum, there are very tender, very
Yeah.
introspective, very since vulnerable, open boys who
Yeah.
get sort of overtly outed because they're perceived to be feminine. So we're having a lot of conversation around getting rid of toxic masculinity, as sort of all boys are toxic and masculine, but changing that to either tender or non-tender behaviour. And what we're starting to find is that being a boy and being a tender boy is absolutely fine. To have
Yeah.
emotions and to be vulnerable, quieter, introspective, or to be a rugby lad and all the muscles, etc. Both are fine, but by saying it's toxic masculinity, you're kind of lumping boys all into one basket. And I think if you change the phraseology to tender and non-tender behaviour, I think it
Yeah.
begins to reframe what boys. And I'm not defending anything to do with misogyny, but it reframes what boys are having to deal with as they're becoming boys. That at the moment, everything is telling them it must be Andrew Tate and masculine and whatever. And our tender boys are being drawn into that non-tender world. What I'm worried about, I'm a father of two daughters, and I'm worried about the boys, being a male and trying to help the boys navigate through it as males. But I'm also concerned about my two daughters in that one's nearly 18 and one is 15, and they're both in mixed schools, and I'm really frightened for them that they're going to grow up in a world where misogyny is the norm, as it was when in our maybe my parents' era or whatever, when
Yeah.
the woman's wife was job sorry the woman's job was in the house, and you're a
Yeah.
home, and that kind of casual misogyny that was available then is kind of rearing its head. And I think, as well as educating the boys, and I think it is having conversations. And the scary thing for me, I was on a webcast last week about Andrew Tate, and there were 50 people on the webcast, and only 4 were men, and which struck me as being,
Right.
because
Wow.
obviously it's females that are experiencing the misogyny, but I think it's as important that men enter the conversation and enter the
Absolutely.
Yeah,
conversation
definitely.
from a male perspective, because it's as much a male problem as it is obviously the females experiencing it. And that really bothered me that I was one of 4 males there on our working party. It is predominantly female, And that kind of further sort of cements into the mind of our students that it's it's not a male thing to do or to be seen to be doing. And I think
Yeah.
we've started to give staff scripts,
Yeah.
what to do if this is said in your classroom. So de-escalate it first of all, to not make a big thing, because I think some of our boys would like an audience and would like to become
Yes.
mini Andrew Tates themselves. So to
Yes.
de-escalate it, and the language is of, I've heard your comment, it isn't acceptable, and I'll have the conversation with at the end why that wasn't acceptable, so that it's seen to be being dealt with,
Mm.
but not in a confrontational, right, you get out, in a way that is, well, hold on a minute,
Yeah.
that's really not appropriate. And it's difficult sometimes, and it is, I think some of our staff are finding some of the more overt language very difficult to tackle, such as you said there about, I have a, your sex life or whatever. I have a lady who works next door to me who, she's young, she's blonde, and of course some of the language that she gets is horrendous, and I think she finds it very difficult tackling that being said to her. So that's where
Yeah.
people like me, and I think males with experience to some extent, that need to perhaps start to form the phalanx of this and be in the front of it, and leading it and leading on it, because
Mm.
those conversations need to be had, you know, with males, telling males that your behaviour is wrong and your attitude is wrong and what you're saying is wrong and why it's wrong, and why as a male I feel
Yes.
affronted by your language and what you're doing to my colleagues. And I think, what do we do about it? We have to make it. We've got to call it in rather than call it out. We have to equip
Mhm.
staff with the knowledge of, um, you know, what is it, where's it come from, and that's a whole
Yeah.
vehicle in itself. And I think schools need to be making this really clear. I think it needs to be done through assemblies. I think schools need to make, really make the fact that
Yeah.
inclusivity now is a really, really important aspect of life in general and in the classroom, and
Yeah.
be it female or homophobia or racism. Um, I think we need to be calling it
Yeah.
in.
And I think as well, kind of one of the big things is don't just deal with the big, deal with the
Yeah,
little as well. So kind of, I don't have the statistics to hand, but there was a statistic I read a while ago that something like 60 to 70% of classroom teachers across primary and secondary are female. And
Yeah.
that flips completely when you get to senior leadership. So even though the majority of teachers are female, the majority of senior leaders are male. And that just sends out this message to kids that men are better at leading. And that, it's a small thing in kind of some ways, but having something like that you can change is just will make all the difference.
and I think also boys, on a similar thing, but boys in primary schools. I think if you're looking for some of the sort of beginnings of where some of these things come from, there are so few male teachers in primary schools, and I think you know. And a lot of sort of single parent families, sadly, it is the absentee father that is missing.
Absolutely.
And in the vacuum of a male role model, they turn to rappers and sports people and whatever.
Yeah.
And the young boys are looking for a role model. They're looking for something to anchor their
Yeah.
masculinity to. And sadly, what they're being anchored to is this blatant Andrew Tate version of being a man, not the tender side of being a man, where you can be romantic and kind and inclusive.
And that's another reason why, like you said, when we're talking about these issues, men should be there at the table,
Yes.
because they can then show a different role for men, can't they, in society, a more supporting role and a more one that leads us to equality.
Before we move on to our 2 stars and a wish, I'd like to kind of finish with one more user feedback. So I've seen a few instances of pushback, like what about men's rights or all lives matter, just because people haven't quite understood the argument being made and become defensive. Sometimes it needs to be clarified that women's rights and men's rights aren't mutually exclusive. The point is one side is coming from a position of inequity and needs greater attention and work to achieve equality. It's certainly a difficult topic to get right, to keep everyone from getting defensive when so many students have already formed such strong opinions, and that's from a maths teacher and a father. we've had so much amazing feedback for this episode. If you want
wow.
to kind of get your phrasing, get your words in, then please do email us at beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk. I'm really, really sorry we couldn't read you all. We were just had so many, and it was fascinating reading them. We do read them all, so please do keep sending them in.
It's your own time you're wasting. Ramblings from Beyond the Classroom with Marie and Jodie. There's not a lot they don't know about teaching.
So we like to finish our podcast with 2 stars and a wish, which apparently Marie didn't know was a thing.
No.
She thought it was just something they did at primary school. So, maybe we need to rethink this. Does anyone have a star that they'd like to add from today?
Yeah, I think the phrase.
Yes.
I think I've done a lot of work on this, and I like the language of calling it in rather than calling it out. And I think that it just sounds more open. If you're going to call these students in for a chat, that's the start of things, isn't it? And if you're going to call it out, you label them, and I think you further entrench the view. So I think my style would be just to change the language around this to calling it in rather than calling it out.
That was going to be mine, to be honest, Neil. I think I liked the example that you said that if it's on the corridor, they get the consequence, and kind of in the young man's mind, that then puts it in the same category as maybe not tucking in your shirt or chewing gum, or kind of swearing even, and this is just not in that same category. And so, like, swearing isn't obviously appropriate in most settings, but it's not nearly as bad, and so putting it in that same column is going to mean that they think it's not as bad as it is. So I think you're right, kind of almost moving away from your standard behaviour management systems that you've got, and call it in instead of calling it out. I love it.
I like that. I tell you what I like though as well, the thought of males finding it absolutely fine to be a tender male.
Yes.
My son's definitely a tender male, and he's struggling with high school.
Yeah.
He finds it very intimidating. And so I like the thought of encouraging that culture that, it's okay. It's okay to be like that.
Do we have, I feel like our general wish is going to be like less misogyny. But is there any more specific wishes that we'd like to add today?
Do you have a specific wish?
I think I said at the start, I get very upset and very concerned by the way that people can call themselves influencers. And I think I don't have the ability to change the internet, but I do have the ability to reframe that. And I think as an influencer, I find that quite an abhorrent use of language. I don't know quite how, but I wish that wasn't able to be a thing. I wish you couldn't just pop up on the internet and call yourself an influencer when you potentially have no understanding or the education or the background to be able to, we had the people coming on, saying the anti-vaxxers who have got no medical knowledge at all, but they became believed. And it's a very dangerous world when anybody can put their opinion across when it's patently wrong or patently. So I wish the influencer trend or whatever it is passes very quickly and we get back to people who have genuine opinions and that are backed up with evidence and education.
Yes. I think my wish would be that young people understand that while teachers and adults might not be up to kind of scratch with the latest social media and the latest way of this being communicated, it's not a new phenomenon for media to be shifting views of people.
Absolutely.
And in the past, sometimes that's been for the better. Often it's been for the worse. Even though the medium is new, the kind of phenomenon isn't. So for young people to understand that, even though we don't understand TikTok, we still might know what we're talking about. And for parents to stop and listen and just understand what's out there as well. It can't all be on teachers, please.
No, it can't. No, not everything else isn't it?
Yeah, tell me about it.
I think my wish would be to see more taught debate to teach pupils the vocabulary of talking about these issues, to help them to see both sides of issues and to help them to think independently and make their own mind up about what they think is right and wrong. That would be my wish. And as an English teacher, I have to say, I did strive in the classroom to achieve that very much. I think English is a good place to do that because you can have open discussions about things. And I used to love giving them a controversial question and then sort of, light the touch paper and then let it go. But yeah, that would be my wish. I agree.
On that note, thank you so much for joining us, Neil.
Yes, thank you. It's been amazing.
Fascinating. And thank you to everyone who sent us in comments and so on. Please do keep doing it. It's beyondmailbag@twinkle.co.uk.
And don't forget, Twinkle doesn't have an E on the end.
She has to get that in at least once an episode.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Neil.
Follow, subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.
This podcast is proudly produced by Beyond. Please bear in mind the views and opinions expressed are those of individuals and may not represent those of Beyond or Twinkle.